Welcome to PTE Updates. For more videos, subscribe our channel.
During the time of the Aztecs, cocoa was mainly used as a beverage. Wines and drinks were made from white pulp around the seeds of the cocoa pod. The beans themselves were used to make hot or cold chocolate drinks. Both the Maya and the Aztec secular drinks used roasted cocoa beans, a foaming agent sugar, toasted corn, and water. Vanilla and/or chili were also used as an ingredient in the drinks. Cocoa beans were also used as a currency and as a tribute tax from peoples ruled by Aztecs. The oily later floating in the chocolate drink cocoa butter was used to protect skin against the sun. For the Aztecs, cocoa had a religious significance. Cocoa was believed to be of divine origin. The cocoa tree was a bridge between earth and heaven. Human sacrifices to appreciate God or sun were first sanctified by giving him chocolate. Cocoa beans were given to priest assistants at children's coming-of-age ceremonies. During marriage ceremonies, the couples drank a symbolic cup of chocolate and exchanged cocoa beans. They believed that drinking chocolate gave mortals some of Quetzalcoatl wisdom, god of learning and the wind.
Sea creatures are inspiring the latest devices that harness wave power. This one, called the oyster, sits on the ocean floor and opens and closes as waves pass over it. Cables attach it to generators on the shore. Since November 2009, it's been powering 9,000 homes in the Orkney Islands. Another device looks like a snake. The anaconda is made from a rubber tube filled with water that floats just below the surface. When a swell hits the front of it, the tube is squeezed. A bulge ripples down its length and powers a turbine in its tail. Prototypes are currently being tested, but the full-scale version will be 200 meters long. This system also looks like a snake, but this one is made of steel. It floats near the surface, where waves make its joints move. This drives hydraulic systems that power electrical generators. Like the anaconda, it's still being tested. Results will prove if these devices are up to the job of supplying viable sources of green energy.
In 1963, Alan Newell and Herbert A. Simon proposed that symbol manipulation was the essence of both human and machine intelligence. They wrote, "A physical symbol system has the necessary and sufficient means of general intelligent action." This claim is very strong. It implies both that human thinking is a kind of symbol manipulation because a symbol system is necessary for intelligence, and that machines can be intelligent because a symbol system is sufficient for intelligence. Another version of this position was described by philosopher Hubert Dreyfus, who called it the physiological assumption. The mind can be viewed as a device operating on bits of information according to formal rules. A distinction is usually made between the kind of high-level symbols that directly correspond with objects in the world, such as dog and tail, and the more complex symbols that are present in a machine like a neural network. Early research into AI, called Good Old-Fashioned Artificial Intelligence by John Hogland, focused on these kinds of high-level symbols.
Today, 150,000 farmers in India have committed suicide in areas where seed has been destroyed, where they have to buy the seed from Monsanto and buy it every year at very, very high cost. And that high-cost seed is getting them into debt, and that debt is pushing them to suicide. What we've done is create community seed banks, places where we collect and save seeds, rescue them from disappearance, multiply them, and then distribute them according to farmers' needs. And about 40 community seed banks have been created across the length and breadth of India. Places where these have been created, farmers are not in distress. because the biggest cost today is seeds and chemicals. These seed banks have now been a new place where we can respond to the new crisis of globalization on the one hand and climate change on the other. Globalization has led to farmer suicides. We are able to take seeds to these suicide zones and distribute the seeds so that farmers can break out of that dependency, grow food crops, get out of debt. We've been able to create community seed banks to deal with climate change, with the extreme flooding, the new droughts, the cyclones, the hurricanes that lead to salinization. And today for us, the work on seed has become the place from where we are responding to the worst tragedies and the worst crises of our times.
Laughter is one of the greatest therapies in combating adversity, and whole communities and nations have frequently relied on humor to get them through their bleakest time. On August 13, 1961, the barbed wire was rolled out of Berlin to create the Berlin Wall. For nearly 30 years, until it was dismantled, wall jokes proliferated. Especially among those living in the East, laughing was all that was left. Jokes about those who rule you, and sometimes those who tyrannize you, are a form of folklore that has existed in societies as seemingly different as communist Eastern Europe, Tsarist Russia, modern Egypt, 12th century Persia, and modern-day Iran. Humor can also be wonderfully subversive. It can protect self-respect and identity. In more totalitarian societies, laughter relieves, at least temporarily, the pressures and anxiety of political oppression. Political jokes may not in themselves topple dictators, but they can provide solace. In a democracy like our own, perhaps the trouble with political jokes is that they sometimes get elected.
Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, was the first person in the United States identified as an asymptomatic carrier of the pathogen associated with typhoid fever. She was presumed to have infected 51 people, 3 of whom died over the course of her career as a cook. She was twice forcibly isolated by public health authorities and died after a total of nearly 3 decades in isolation. From 1900 to 1907, Mallon worked as a cook in the New York City area for 7 families. In 1900, she worked in Mamaroneck, New York, where, within 2 weeks of her employment, residents developed typhoid fever. In 1901, she moved to Manhattan, where members of the family for whom she worked developed fevers and diarrhea, and the laundress died. Mallon then went to work for a lawyer. She left after 7 of the 8 people in that household became ill. In 1906, she took a position in Oyster Bay, Long Island, and within 2 weeks, 10 of the 11 family members were hospitalized with typhoid. She changed jobs again, and similar occurrences happened in 3 more households. She worked as a cook for the family of a wealthy New York banker, Charles Henry Warren. When the Warrens rented a house in Oyster Bay for the summer of 1906, Mallon went along too. From August 27th to September 3rd, 6 of the 11 people in the family came down with typhoid fever. The disease at the time was unusual in Oyster Bay, according to 3 medical doctors who practiced there.
I'm 43 years old, and I owe tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. Oh, sure, I knew the loans were piling up as I went through school. But with one loan coming from here, another from there, I had no idea of the rock slide that was building. 15 years later, I still experience moments of sheer horror regarding my family's financial situation. My monthly student loan payment is more than triple my car payment. Okay, so without my college degree, I would not have been able to get my current job. For that I'm grateful, but at what cost? My loans have been accruing at a rate of 10%, and now they have burgeoned to, well, I'm an English major, you do the math, I don't think they'll ever get paid off. We're in debt way past our eyeballs, and there's no hope in sight. I'm being kept in class, a financial class of graduates whose only hope for attending college meant borrowing money from the government. Because of our mounting credit card debt and monthly payments that far exceed our family's income, my kids will also join the class of citizens who can't rely on their parents for college support. Do I wish I'd chosen another educational route? You bet. Perhaps trade school. I thought that being a plumber might not be such a bad gig. But if your job aspirations require a 4-year degree, take my advice and choose a college you can afford both during and after graduation. Take a realistic look at your anticipated income and factor in priorities that don't carry a price, like the spouse and children you might want to have someday. I was overconfident that my student loan debt would pale in comparison to the lucrative writing career I'd enjoy after graduation. Now I'm paying for that decision in more ways than I'd ever imagined.
There are a lot of people talking about globalization, many of whom have strong and often conflicting views about the subject. Some authors see globalization as a rather positive thing in the meaning of the consumer society and benefit to shoppers of more things to buy and services to get in Western world. Other authors and many non-governmental organizations, like Third World Network, are much more critical, seeing globalization as colonization of the developing world. Globalization is seen as a complicated process, focusing on how events, decisions, and activities in one part of the world can have consequences in other parts of the world. Leon Collins, 2004, 4. There are different definitions of globalization. Globalization is increasing interdependence of national economies in trade, finance, and macroeconomic policy. Globalization is diffusion of practices, values, and technology that have an influence on people's lives worldwide. A recognition of social geography marked by the growth of transplanetary and supraterritorial connections between people. The trend has unfolded at greatest speeds, on greatest scales, to greatest extents, and with greatest impacts since the middle of the 20th century. Globalization is a process fueled and resulting in increasing cross-border flows of goods, services, money, people, information, and culture.